Yesterday we saw a flurry of NHL trades, and could the floodgates begin to open here as we approach the NHL trade deadline? Today we're back with all the latest NHL trade rumors. We have some big updates on the future of Artemi Panarin with the Columbus Blue Jackets. I want to talk about Derick Brassard's future with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Also want to touch base on the Philadelphia Flyers, who might be available from their roster as we approach the deadline. Plus, with the Leafs making a big deal for Jake Muzzin yesterday, are they done or could we see more activity from them? We'll get into all that coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, we had a flurry of trades yesterday with some big moves, especially one by the Toronto Maple Leafs and the LA Kings, with the Maple Leafs acquiring Jake Muzzin from the LA Kings. Of course, we saw the other trade between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Dallas Stars with Jamie Oleksiak going from Pittsburgh back to Dallas for the exact same draft pick that was traded for him in the first place. Of course, that all came in the news that Mark Mathot did have season-ending knee surgery and would not be returning this season. So therefore, Dallas had a bit of a hole in their blue line, and they wanted a similar type of defender who's like big and strong and can play that physical style of the game, which Oleksiak certainly fits the mold there. So he returns back there. Obviously, with the Penguins side of it, they got Justin Schultz getting ready to return, and they had a lot of healthy defensemen there. So kind of works well for both clubs. So it's almost like the trade in the first place never actually happened, and the Penguins basically rented Oleksiak for nothing for, I think it was 82 or 83 games or something to that effect. But I do fully suspect here, like I mentioned before, that we're going to have a very, very busy NHL trade season. I've said it before. Buckle up. The floodgates might be about to open here with the Maple Leafs striking first while the iron's hot and getting Jake Muzzin. You very well might see some other teams following suit and not waiting too long until we get to the deadline, because they might miss out on what their team desperately needs to help them get into the playoffs. Now, as I mentioned, we have a bunch of things I want to touch on here today. Let's get started with the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, the Flyers, as we know, are not having a great season. Likely going to be sellers come the deadline. It's been noted from GM Chuck Fletcher that basically the only player that he feels is off limits right now is Captain Claude Giroux. Now, after his statements recently to a Philadelphia reporter, there's been some speculation and maybe even young defenseman Shane Gostisbehere could possibly be available. I mean, Gostisbehere's a left shot defenseman, 25 years old. He signed through this year and 4 more years at $4.5 million, so a pretty reasonable contract. Not having the greatest season like a lot of the guys on the Flyers. Obviously, the team's not doing overly well. I mean, they've had a little bit of a hot streak lately, but overall the season hasn't been very good. But still, he's really young, has a lot of potentials, put up some good seasons already in his career. And, you know, there's certainly a name that's been out there. Now, I don't have any firm information to suggest that the Flyers are definitely going to shop him, but when he was to mention that Giroux was the only untouchable, who's obviously an older player, their captain, been there a long time, still a great performer for them, you can't help but wonder about some of their younger players that very well would likely fetch a really good return. There's been lots of teams that were interested in Jake Muzzin that very well might shift gear here and look at a guy like Shane Gostisbehere. Like, I know the Montreal Canadiens were a team that's been looking for a left shot defenseman for some time to play that top pair with Shea Weber. You know, they haven't quite found him yet. Obviously, they'd like to really get rid of that Karl Alzner contract, which I know is not going to be easy here. I'm not suggesting the Flyers would take that off their hands, but I know there had been some speculation, and they also were looking at Jake Muzzin and the LA Kings. Obviously, they missed out on that one. And Shane Gostisbehere is a slightly different type of defenseman than Muzzin. He's a little younger, you know, very offensively gifted here. So I'm not going to suggest that the Flyers are going to trade him for sure. But like I said, his name's been out there just because he's not deemed untouchable by the general manager. So teams like Montreal and many others looking for that left shot defenseman very well could be lining up to make an offer here. And we'll see what happens now. Montreal's GM, Marc Bergevin, has made it known that he's not interested in rental players. He's not going to mortgage the future, you know, for a small upgrade now. But if he's going to make any deals, they're going to be hockey trades with guys with term, and it certainly fits that mold. So not going to suggest the Habs are going hard after Gostisbehere. There's been some reports indicating that, you know, Gostisbehere could fetch a good return for the Flyers, and then maybe they should take a look at it. So we'll see what happens. That very well might be a deal as well that waits for the offseason. But on to some other deals here that likely do happen before the deadline. Let's touch on Pittsburgh Penguins center Derick Brassard. Now, as we know, Brassard was highly sought after at last year's deadline, and one of the teams that were really trying to make a deal for him was the Winnipeg Jets. Now, unfortunately for the Jets, they didn't get that deal done. However, they did end up getting Paul Stastny from St. Louis, and that deal worked out quite well. Stastny performed quite admirably for them and really was a big help in their playoff run in the last year's 2018 playoffs. So, but it's been rumored here again that the Jets are once again interested in Derick Brassard, and the Penguins and the Jets have had conversations apparently. They've kind of kicked tires on reacquiring him, but so far it looks as though they might not have been real pleased with what the asking price was on Pittsburgh's side of the equation. Of course, Brassard's had a pretty favorable contract, with part of that salary being retained by the Vegas Golden Knights. Obviously, that deal last year saw him go to Pittsburgh through Ottawa, and Vegas was a very complicated deal. Technically, he was a member of Vegas for a very brief amount of time. They retained a bunch of his salary and sent him over to Pittsburgh. They ended up getting Ryan Reeves. That complicated deal kind of, really was confusing there for a lot of people in the beginning, but that's how it ended up going down. One report I've seen indicates that maybe Vegas could spoil Winnipeg's party here yet again and maybe intervene and maybe acquire Brassard themselves. I mean, they're already paying him a big chunk of his salary. They likely wouldn't mind adding some forward depth for the playoffs. So maybe Vegas jumps in here and kind of ruins the fun here for Winnipeg and acquires Brassard themselves. Now, of course, it's going to depend on the asking price for sure. However, Pittsburgh's, depending on what they do and not do here, they may have to adjust their asking price. Brassard's a pending UFA. But at the same time, Jim Rutherford's only going to move him if he feels he can upgrade the position. And I'm not sure what Vegas is going to have to offer in return to help them right away. I mean, maybe they might offer up a guy like Lindbergh or Carpenter. Those guys can play center ice, but I'm not sure it's a big upgrade. So I'm not sure how the Penguins would feel about what the Vegas Golden Knights could offer in return. Maybe they ship Brassard to Winnipeg, Vegas, etc., and end up acquiring a different center iceman through another club on a separate deal. Hard to say, but Brassard certainly does remain to be available out there. Winnipeg is highly interested, and apparently Vegas might be involved here yet again. So stay tuned for that, but likely Brassard does find a new home before the February 25th deadline. Now, of course, yesterday we saw the big trade by the Toronto Maple Leafs and Jake Muzzin, as I mentioned. Now, of course, it's been rumored all along they were looking more for a right-shot defenseman. Well, of course, Jake Muzzin shoots left. Now, that puts Muzzin as a left-shot defenseman. Jake Gardner's a left-shot defenseman. So is Morgan Rielly. So right now, it's likely that Muzzin plays that top pair with Rielly, plays his offside on the right side, which he can certainly do. I think he's done a little bit in the past. I do think Muzzin's a great addition for the Maple Leafs. He does bring the ability to move the puck, a little bit of offense, but he's certainly very steady defensively, got good size, can certainly throw the big hits in the defensive end when needed as well. So I do think he's exactly what the Leafs were needing, but there's still a lot of talk that maybe they're not done, and that right shot defenseman still might come. It's going to have to come on a smaller cap hit. I mean, we talked about guys like Dougie Hamilton or other top-notch right shot defensemen like Alex Pietrangelo that might very well, would have a bigger cap hit and play a bigger role in the team. But who's to say they couldn't still go after a guy like maybe like a Radko Gudas from the Philadelphia Flyers, maybe Brett Pesce from Carolina. Depending on what the asking prices are, they can still acquire a right shot defenseman with a lower cap hit and fit them into the cap situation here. I mean, they still have over $4 million of cap space to play with between now and the deadline. So we'll see. But is the Toronto Maple Leafs done here, or do the Leafs still go out and obtain more depth in that right shot defenseman? Maybe a forward as well, someone who can play that fourth line role. Maybe somebody's on an expiring $1 million contract, something to that effect. Somebody's not going to mess too much with the cap situation. Can have some experience. Can play fourth line minutes when need be, but at the same time, not necessarily be in the lineup every day either. I do fully suspect the Leafs to continue adding at least some. I would say more likely they would probably prefer to add on the D side, but you just never know. You can't have too much depth for the playoffs. They might as well make the best here what they have, and we'll see what they do. But let me know if you think if the Leafs are done, or are they going to continue to add here before the February 25th deadline. Now, another player to keep your eye on as well that I do believe likely does get traded is another pending UFA, and that's Detroit Red Wings forward Gustav Nyquist. I think Nyquist is quietly having a pretty solid season. He's got 43 points in 51 games. Obviously got a lot of experience. He was around when Red Wings were more successful, going on deeper playoff runs. So I think he's got a wealth of experience to bring for sure. Nyquist is a guy that's had some pretty solid years in the NHL. I mean, back when him and Thomas Tatar were first coming up with the Red Wings, I know the Red Wings thought they'd be consistent 30-plus goal scorers, and it never really turned out to be that. They're still pretty decent players, but not quite the high-end potential that, some thought when they were first coming up through the ranks here. But Nyquist, I think, is a guy who could add help to a lot of different teams out there. If you take a look around teams looking to add for the playoffs, and I mentioned the Winnipeg Jets, I think, for example, they're more likely to add at center, but depending on the asking price, they very well could add a guy like Nyquist as well. I mean, you get other teams like the New York Islanders is another team to keep your eye on. Obviously, the Islanders are, in a strong position for a playoff spot right now. There's many around the league. Calgary Flames, another one. There's lots of teams out there that could benefit from a depth forward and probably wouldn't have too hefty of an asking price to obtain Gustav Nyquist and get him on their roster for the playoffs. So another player from the Red Wings here that I feel pending UFA, likely a guy that gets moved, and so we got to keep your eye on him. I don't have him linked to any specific team right now, but I do think he's a guy that's going to be in play and wouldn't be surprised to see him moved here before the deadline. Of course, the big name we want to talk about here today is Columbus Blue Jackets forward Artemi Panarin. Now, we've had a flurry of events here over the past 24 hours or so. I almost recorded a video on this yesterday, except we had all the trade activity, which kind of took over the news cycle, and I kind of put this on hold for right now. But Artemi Panarin, initially we had a tweet from Aaron Portzline, who covers the Columbus Blue Jackets for The Athletic, indicating that Panarin and his agent were going to have another meeting because they apparently had met over the All-Star break. Panarin's agent also had a meeting with Columbus Blue Jackets general manager Jarmo Kekalainen. Put the tweet up here on the screen, but basically says that they needed another meeting to determine what Panarin's willingness would be to negotiate another future contract with the Columbus Blue Jackets between now and the end of the season. So there appeared to be some hope. There was a lot of positive vibes on Twitter. I've seen both Columbus Blue Jackets and Panarin. Maybe he's willing to stay. Maybe he's reconsidered a few things. Then we saw subsequent tweets come out. One from his agent Dan Milstein, which came out last night. To summarize the quote from Milstein, and I'll put that up on the screen here as well, basically it says that Artemi Panarin is not willing to talk contract at all between now and the end of the season, and he's basically going to be a free agent, and he'll discuss his future and potential contract with the Blue Jackets in the offseason. So all that glimmer of hope that kind of came the day before kind of went away. This does not look good. Obviously, from there, we saw further comments from general manager Jarmo Kekalainen. I'll put that up on the screen as well. Basically, he's saying that, they've said all along that if they had to make tough decisions, that they would. They have to do what's best for this franchise, not only for this playoff run, but for the future as well. And that they're big fans of Artemi Panarin. They really like what he brings to their club. And if he insists on going to free agency, that they'll be banging down his door on July 1st to attempt to re-sign him. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that he's even going to be a member of the Columbus Blue Jackets come that time. Not to say that they couldn't attempt to re-sign him regardless, but you have to think here with the language from Jarmo Kekalainen that they're going to do what's best for this hockey club. Now, I understand that the Blue Jackets are a team that's almost guaranteed to make the playoffs here. They're doing very well this year. I'd be surprised if they missed the playoffs. They'd have to have a disastrous last stretch here of games, but with that all said, and they're trying to win their first playoff series in franchise history, they've got not only Panarin, but Bobrovsky as well. You got to remember, Sergei Bobrovsky is also a pending UFA. He was suspended for a brief amount of time earlier because of an incident. His future with the club is certainly contentious as well, and a lot of uncertainty whether or not he sticks around. And really, it puts the general manager in a really tough position. You can't help but think that his decisions here is going to be incredibly difficult. And what should he do? Should he trade these guys and go into the playoffs without them? Which certainly, you're almost guaranteed to not win those trades. It's very difficult to win a trade when you're trading a superstar like that. Most teams are likely going to offer more, picks and prospects and that type of thing. So it's really hard to say what you do here. Plus, you might make one of the other guys going for the Stanley Cup stronger by trading these guys. So you just don't know what to do here. But I can't imagine that they're going to take a risk here of ending up like the Islanders did with John Tavares and kind of go into this, blind going into the offseason and knowing that they're likely not going to re-sign them. You have to do what's best for the franchise. Personally, I see Columbus as a pretty decent team. I do see them as a playoff team. I don't think that they're in a position where we can call them a Stanley Cup contender. Not to say that we don't see teams, go on big cup runs or deep playoff runs that necessarily weren't going into the playoffs as a top team per se, but still, at the same time, is it really worth risking losing these guys for nothing as free agents to potentially win a round of the playoffs? I don't think it is myself. Personally, if I were them, and if you really believe that the odds are slim of you retaining them, you really should trade them. Now, of course, a lot depends on what the asking price is, too. There's so many factors here. Hard to say what to do, but even though there was a glimmer of hope of Panarin staying, to me, that door has been shut now, and I think the Columbus Blue Jackets need to have some deep meetings here, have some very tough decisions to make. And what do you think they should do? Do you think they should make a trade here and not risk losing them? Because to be my honest opinion here, I really think it sounds like Bobrovsky and Panarin are almost all the way out the door already. So let me know what you think, and we'll continue the conversation down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there is plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.